Sorry, Christina.
We're like twins.
Yeah, we're twins. Twins. Sorry. There you go.
I'm an addict named Christina. I'm pretty loud. I know you can hear me. 8 years ago, this time of year, I put every belonging I had in a car, because it all fit in one car then. Sometimes I miss those days. And I moved to Athens, Ohio. If you don't know about Athens, Ohio, it's a small college town where there's a lot of drinking. I had 2 years clean. I moved in with two strangers, and it was pretty frightening. But I found the first NA meeting that night, and I went to it because that's what y'all taught me to do. And I reached out and I said I was new in town, and I met our speaker and his roommate, and it turns out they live 3 doors down from me. If that wasn't God, I really don't know what is. And a friendship started, and we went to meeting. There's not a lot of NA meetings in Athens, Ohio, okay? And it really takes the people that are there to continually open the door week in and week out, no matter what. Jason was really dedicated to the Thursday night meeting on campus, and he was there week in and week out, making sure it got open. And, there's just a handful of us. But we kept each other clean. So eventually I moved away from Athens. I was still in school, but I got engaged, moved in with my fiance. Gas prices went up. And decided to move back to Athens for financial reasons. I was looking for a roommate, and I was looking on Craigslist. I said, damn, that looks like Jason's house. I called him up and said, Jason, is your house on Craigslist? He said, yeah. I was like, well, I'm looking for a place to live. And so I moved in with Jason. And we lived together while I was in grad school, me, my dog, and my guinea pig. He helped take care of the guinea pig. But I want to share one thing that I think really sums up who our speaker is and who he is to me. When I moved to Athens from Virginia Beach, I was on my first 6-step. And if you've ever done a 6-step, then you know what it's like. So I wasn't necessarily in the best place spiritually then. Ironically, I'm there again. So this is a little ironic. But I remember going to a Sunday meeting in Athens, and I'm sharing about how much pain I'm in and being so deeply aware of my defects and hating myself. And Jason says, well, I didn't really find any peace or serenity till after I worked a 7-step. The only thing I could think was, God, fuck you. I don't want to hear about it. But he was right, and I held on to that piece of hope, and I survived that first 6-step, and I grew, and I've moved on, and I just went through one again. But I still think about that, if I just hold on to this dark time, there's light on the other side, Being in small town recovery, we need each other. And Jason gave me a lot of different perspective. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch and chain smoke cigarettes, and he'd listen to me bitch about work and bitch about things, and he'd be like, well, and he'd just give me a different perspective, really whether I wanted to hear it or not, And what I know is even when I get pissed off at people, it's probably because they're telling me the truth. So with no further ado, I also have to say, there's further ado. This man officiated my wedding, so he's really special to me. And no further ado now, I give you Jason H.
Hi, my name's Jason. I'm an addict. Can you hear me all right? Oh, man. Can you hear me all right? Okay. I will try not to concuss myself. So this is a trip. The Sunday morning meeting did not used to be this full. It was like much less full. This is really awesome to be speaking here today at Ripley. I remember my first year clean. At one point, I was at my sponsor's house, and we were talking about recovery and stuff, and he got into this dresser and started digging around for things, and he goes, "Here, I got something for you." And he handed me 3 cassette tapes, and they were speaker tapes. One was Bob B. from Ohio. One was Bo S. from Georgia. And one was Terry B. from Pennsylvania. One of the tapes was from Anakna, and 2 were from this sort of mystical-sounding place called Ripley, West Virginia. It sounded very exotic. I had not really been out of Ohio except for failed attempts to stop using, and that always captured my imagination. And I think fall of '99, I came to my first Ripley, and I've kept coming back since. And this place is really, really special to me. A lot of amazing things have happened here for me in my recovery. I want to tell you a story about those tapes, because those 3 speaker tapes were in a constant rotation in my cassette player for my first year clean, and they're a huge part of the foundation of my recovery. I could probably give you any 3 of those stories. I could just stand up here and recite them. I knew them that well. Bob B., I remember him talking about how he was in treatment, and one of the other residents there made him write, "I am not sorry," 100 times, because he would apologize for everything. Anything that happened was his fault, and I could relate to that. I'm like, oh my God, I do that. I feel responsible for everything. If, something halfway across the world bad happens, it's my fault. I'm a terrible person because of it. Bo S., I remember him talking about how the second step says we came to believe, and came to is a dynamic phrase, and it implies change, and it means that our beliefs will change, and we have to be open to that. And when I heard that, it gave me a huge freedom, because I'm the type of person that has to get it right? If I need a higher power, I have to get the right one, right? And, fuck it, if I can't do it right, I'm not doing it at all. And when he said that, I said, wait, no, I can do whatever. It's gonna change. I need to be open to it to change. And that really helped me get through the second step. And Terry B. said a lot of stuff. One of the things he said that was huge for me early in recovery and is huge for me today is the first time I ever heard, whatever you were willing to do to get high, you should be willing to do to recover. So he said, I never said, oh, the game's on, I'm not going to go use tonight, right? Yeah, right. He never, and he said, if there's some preacher on the corner, talking about Jesus and banging the Bible, that wouldn't get him off the corner if he was waiting for the man, so that's not going to chase him out of a meeting. And, that simple rule of thumb was so important to me. So these 3 guys, Bob B., Bo S., and Terry B., huge part of my recovery. Didn't know who they were. Well, Bob B. is my great-great-grand sponsor. I've met him. I've gotten to know him. I had him speak for me at a function. Absolutely wonderful guy. Bo S., I found out who Bo was. I've heard many of his tapes. I've read a lot of his stuff. I've met lots of his sponsors, or sponsees. I haven't met Bo yet, but I feel like I know him pretty well. Terry B. from Pennsylvania was a mystery. I would ask people, do you know Terry B. from Pennsylvania? No, never heard of him. He was this huge mystery. About 3 years ago, some fantastic things happened in my life. I got this huge, life-changing professional opportunity, and I found myself moving from Athens to Pittsburgh. And I'm driving to Pittsburgh, and I'm driving just so overjoyed and grateful, and just reflecting on how when I don't try to take control and I just do the next right thing and go to meetings and practice these principles, amazing things happen in my life, things that I couldn't have dreamed of. And I'm reflecting on all of this and feeling all this gratitude, and I just got this sense, I go, all I know is that Terry B. is from the state of Pennsylvania, which is a big state. But I knew that in my time in Pittsburgh, I was going to meet Terry B. I just knew it, right? So I get to Pittsburgh, I move into my house. The next day, I go to a meeting a block and a half from my house, the Beechwood Group. It's my home group. It's the best meeting in Pittsburgh, at least, probably on the planet. But But I go to the meeting, it's a huge meeting, and I introduce myself, hey, just moved to town. Then it splits up into 3 meetings, and someone told me, hey, you want to go to the kitchen. Kitchen's where the hardcore people go. I'm like, okay. The kitchen is a steps tradition study. Every other week, step tradition, step tradition. And this week we were on a tradition, and it goes around, and there's a young guy, like hipster-looking guy there, mid-20s maybe a little more than mid-20s, but he starts sharing about like service stuff and the principles and the traditions and stuff, and like my ears perk up. I'm like, oh, me and this guy, we got something in common, we're service junkies, we like really get into this, and then it comes around to me and I start sharing some experiences in service and this principle and that principle, and we like made eye contact, we were like flirting from across the table. And we're like, yeah, this guy I need to know, right? So the meeting ends, we get out, and we immediately gravitate towards one another, and we're chatting and talking, we're hitting it off and stuff. I'm like, hey, let me get your phone number. So he gives me his phone number, I'm putting it in my phone. I go, what's your name? He goes, my name's Terry. I go, okay, Terry, what's your last initial? He goes, B. And I go, well, that's funny, because I'm looking for a Terry B, but you are not him, because he's got to be like 50 by now. And he goes, oh, that's my dad. He's celebrating 30 years next week. You should come. And so I've always known I'm in the right place, but I knew that was my home group then. And, that, when I think about that, that's the type of thing that how often does something like that happen? The truth is, something like that happens all of the time. All of the time that I'm awake and open to it and not trying to control the world around me. That stuff happens all the time. One thing I didn't mention, in that speaker tape, at one point, Terry B., his very young 1-2-year-old son starts crawling around his legs and introduces and interrupts the story. And that was the Terry that I met that night. So this kid I'm talking to at a meeting had been a huge part of my recovery for 15 years. And it's a trip. So, all right, I'm about ready to start, maybe. I asked them how long I had. They said, well, a CD's 80 minutes, and I won't go that long because I smoke, so 60 minutes is my cutoff. But so a little quick background. I was born in Northwest Ohio, very small town. I believe I was born an addict. Like I heard another speaker say, it doesn't matter, but I really believe I was. My earliest memories are just feeling different. Since as early as I can remember, I know that I felt different than other people. I felt like I didn't belong. When somewhere in junior high or something, there are these group of kids that wore leather jackets. We called them hoods back in the day, and they were different from other people, and I didn't feel like them, but I thought if I hung out with them, I would be in a smaller group of people that I felt different than, right? And, that's how I started smoking cigarettes. That's how I eventually got into drugs, and when I started using, that feeling went away a little bit. Using was fun initially, and then the fun stopped and I couldn't. And if you're here, you probably know that story. I won't go into it. My last use isn't that memorable. My last arrest is memorable, and I will never forget the last time I got arrested. I was reporting to a probation officer once a week and peeing in a cup. And I had this brilliant system worked out where a guy I worked with peed in a little bottle, and I stuck it in my pocket and took it with me because my PO was this sweet little old lady, and she didn't go into the bathroom with me, right? So I go to report this one day, and she's training a new probation officer. And this guy, he's like big meathead, like I would be in the NFL if they hadn't taken out my knee, blah, 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 whatever. And he was really into his job, and he was really into going to that bathroom with me and really into seeing everything with his eyes. And I'm like, shit. And so I'm standing there at the urinal, and here's my thought. I just need to pee in this cup. Okay, like the fake pee that was out of the picture, that's not going to happen. I need to pee in this cup and give it to him and get out of here, and then I can go get really high. And that was it. That's where my thought stopped. I did not have the ability to think beyond the next high. As long as I could get out of that office and get high, it was okay. Nothing else mattered. The problem was I was high and I couldn't pee. So eventually this guy got annoyed, and they took me to jail, and I wound up in a holding tank again with that same thought, how the hell did I wind up here again? And that was it. You know, I spent a few months in jail. At one point in jail, I couldn't do anything. I literally collapsed on my bed and prayed for seriously the first time in my life. Prayed to whatever, I don't know. And I didn't pray to get clean. I didn't pray to get out of jail. I prayed to get put where I needed to be. I didn't think I could get clean. Well, no, that's not true. I thought if I went to like some treatment center in Tibet on top of a mountain for 5 years, right? And then came back and worked in treatment and like did it all the time, that maybe I could not use again. I didn't believe I would ever wake up without the obsession to use. That was an impossibility. But, I eventually got out of jail, and I didn't want to use, but I did. And I used for a little while, and then I was at a Chinese restaurant with my mom, and I saw an old outpatient counselor that I had. And he asked me how I was, and I actually told him, I'm not good. I'm horrible. I want to stop using, and I can't. I need to go somewhere. Can you help me? And he helped me. And he got me into this recovery house type of place in Alverton, Ohio, the very northwest tip of Ohio, 2 minutes from Michigan, 3 minutes from Indiana, in the middle of nowhere. There was one NA meeting 30 minutes from the meeting. The next closest NA meeting was over an hour. I went there. I went to that NA meeting on a Tuesday. I'd been going to meetings for a couple of years, but was just showing up. I wanted to stop hurting, but didn't want to stop using, and that didn't work out. But I went to this NA meeting completely defeated and, at a complete point of surrender, and I heard a guy share. And when he shared, I didn't know this at the time. I didn't realize what he was doing, but he shared applying the spiritual principle of anonymity. When he shared, he never mentioned a drug. He didn't even talk about using. He talked about his feelings, and he talked about the way he thought, and he shared about his recovery. And for the first time in my life, I identified with another human being. I heard him share, and I said, oh my God, this guy used like I did. This guy thinks like I do. This guy has, whatever's wrong with me, he has it. This person is like me. First time in my life that ever happened. And I eventually asked him to become my sponsor. And he's still my sponsor today, which is really amazing. He lives in Arizona, and I only see him a couple of times a year. I talk to him a lot on the phone, but when we get together, I sit with him, and it's amazing to have that type of relationship. Someone who's known you, 16 years of my life and more, and it's an awesome gift. Sometimes I hear about people who have everyone they got clean with. And I've moved around a lot in recovery. I'm like, oh man, I don't have that. I don't have all these people that I've known for years, but I do. They're just all over the place. But those relationships are the same. It's just as deep and just as loving and special. So I got to this place, and I was serious. I could not use again. I knew the program was the answer, and I knew that's what I was going to do, but I didn't know how to do it. I went to well over 90 meetings in 90 days, and that helped a lot. And I didn't use, and that helped a lot. But along the way, I also started bathing and, tried to not lie so much and, just a few things. And this amazing thing happened, like people started looking at me differently. And like the recovery house I was at, they would give me like responsibility and things to do. And I'm like, well, this is awesome. This is recovery. Look at this. People don't look at me like, they want to run as far away as they can, this is great. I'm doing great. I'm not using, and people look at me a certain way. And, that worked for a few months, and then that stopped working. The details don't really matter, but I'd built my self-esteem on this outside stuff, on how other people viewed me, and everything outside of me is going to change. And one day, something outside of me changed, and I had a complete nervous breakdown. I was a complete mess. I was curled up in a corner literally for 6 hours crying. Did not know what to do, could not move. Eventually, some friends of mine came in, they're like, dude, what's up? And they like literally shoveled me up off the floor. Not literally, but they emotionally shoveled me up off the floor, and they took me down to the offices where this one guy was working late. And this one guy was a grand sponsee of BOS, actually. And he was a member of Narcotics Anonymous. And he sat with me 3 hours a night over the next 3 nights and helped walk me through this pain. He told me some great things. At one point, we're talking, he's asking me, well, what I'm doing. And I'm like, well, I'm going to meetings. I'm not using, I'm reading this religious stuff. I'm doing this. And he's like, have you heard of the steps? And I'm like, well, yeah, I've heard of the steps. At one point, I asked him, what can I do? And he said, have you read the basic text? I'm like, of course I've read the basic text, front to back. He said, have you read chapter 5? Well, I'm sure I've read chapter 5. He said, go home, read chapter 5, and read chapter 9. He told me chapter 9 is the chapter he reads whenever his hole starts to ache and he needs some immediate relief. And by the end of that chapter, it usually feels better. If it doesn't, he reads it again. But I got back and I read chapter 5, and motherfucker, someone stuck a chapter in there called What Can I Do? It was not in there before, I swear. That chapter was added somewhere around the end of 1998 because it wasn't in there the first time I read the basic text. I read that chapter, and it says, begin your own program by taking step 1 from the previous chapter, how it works. And I said, okay, so apparently these steps have something to do with recovery. How do I work them? And he shared with me how he worked the first step. And he said, write about 3 things that you're powerless over and make your life unmanageable. And drugs and alcohol can only be one of them. And I said, what are you talking about? Drugs and alcohol are my problem. And he said, no, they're just one area of your life. And he shared with me part of his first step. His name was Albert. He was about this tall and about as wide as this thing up here. He's a great guy. He used to own a chain of pizza parlors, and that didn't work out well for him. But he talked about how he wrote about food, right? He used food the same way he used drugs. He used food to cover up his feelings, to change the way he felt. And he obsessed and compulsed about food. And I'm like, okay, I think maybe I can do that. And I went back and I started writing. Drugs and alcohol was easy. I could do that in my sleep. I had done it at so many outpatients and whatnot. And then I had to come up with 2 more things. And being incredibly unique, I wound up coming up with money and women, right? 2 things that, don't give anyone else problems. And but so I started writing about this, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I just wrote. And by the end of it, I had all 3 of them laid out, and I saw that it was the exact same thing. The same feelings, the same obsession, the same compulsion, using things to change the way that I think other people think about me, all of this stuff. It was exactly the same with women and with money, and that's when I realized, I knew that I was powerless. I absolutely knew my life was unmanageable. I always missed that word addiction in the first step. I thought my problem was drugs. My problem is deeper than that. My problem is the disease of addiction, and it's inside me. And when I worked that step, that's my new daughter. She's awesome. When I worked that step and realized, oh my God, the problem is inside of me, it was a huge relief. Because that's all I had to change. Up until that point, I had blamed and tried to change everything outside of me. The problem was always the drugs, the judges, the cops, my girlfriend, my parents, the town I lived in. That was always the problem. That's the stuff I was always trying to change. When I learned that the problem was this disease of addiction inside of me, and that's the only thing that I have to change, it was a huge relief, especially because by that point I knew that there were these things called the 12 steps that were specifically designed and proven to fix that thing that's wrong inside of me. And, and that it was my responsibility to fix that. It was my responsibility to ask for help and to work steps and to fix that thing inside of me. And that's one of the turning points in my recovery. There are turning points in my recovery all the time. So that's when I started working the steps. And at that point, I started to get to know my sponsor more. And I remember one day, the first time my sponsor took me to his house. And I walked into his house, and the thing that really stood out to me is that it was clean. It was a modest house, but it was clean and looked put together. And I'm like, wait a minute, how can someone like me live in a place that's clean? That doesn't make sense to me. And that was sort of my first indication that, recovery was possible for someone like me. I saw his house and it was clean. I'm like, oh my God, one of us can have a clean house. And, I got to know him more, and I got to see how he interacted with the world around him. I got to see how he interacted with people that he worked with and people in the community. And, seeing recovery work in his life is how I initially came to believe that I could be restored to sanity. If this person who I identified with, who has the same problem I did, has this life that's pretty good, then maybe it's possible for me. And, I went on to the third step. I told my sponsor, I'm like, I think I'm ready for the fourth step. He's like, well, okay, then we should probably work the third step. And he gave me a bunch of stuff. I had always heard him share that the third step is a decision to work the rest of the steps. And I heard it, and I didn't quite understand it at the time. He gave me the stuff to read and to write about, and I really came to understand that the third step is a decision to work the rest of the steps. A decision, doesn't matter what I do in the real world, but I know what a decision is. It's a commitment to a course of action. That's the definition of a decision. And the third step, I make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of this higher power. And, I learned that that's sort of the beginning process that comes full circle in the 11th step, where I get a conscious contact with this higher power and this higher power's will for me. And I did all the reading, and I understood it, and it was great, and I thought I had worked the third step. And I didn't work the third step until the day I started the fourth step, which wasn't immediately, and was prompted by some pain. But, a decision is a commitment to a course of action. The only way that you show commitment is by doing it. And the day I started working the fourth step was the day I really worked my third step. But in between, I got out of the recovery house I was at. I started going to school, which I'll get into maybe later. I got a job, and I figured, hey, I could use girls, right? Something. That's not what I thought. But there was this girl around, and she was not a healthy girl. She was a using addict. But, something made sense in my head. And so I started hanging out with her, and things went downhill clean really quickly. I was living with my parents at the time. I was working third shift at the recovery house I went through, 45 minutes northwest. I was going to school during the day, 45 minutes southeast of my parents, and this girl lived 45 minutes southwest. So there's this huge basically, I didn't sleep for a long time, right? I still went to 1 or 2 meetings, not enough at all. But I was just being crazy. I was going from work to school to this girl's house home, not sleeping, and I was living with my parents, and my mom saw what was going on, and she was concerned. And one day, I was near the end of the road, and I got home early in the morning from work, I believe, and on my ride home, I just keep telling myself, if she calls, I'm not going over. If she calls, I'm not going over. If she calls, I'm not going over. Went to my room, saying, if she calls, I'm not going over. If she calls, I'm not going over. Literally the second my head hit the pillow, the phone rang, and I knew I was going over. I knew that I had absolutely no choice in the matter. When that phone rang, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew I had no control over it. And I answered the phone, and I said, yeah, I'll be over. And I gathered my things, and I went to go out to my car, and my mom tried to stop me because she saw what I had been doing in my life. And I tried to avoid her, and I jetted out to my car really quickly, and she followed back, and I pulled out of the driveway as quick as I could, and she ran down the driveway trying to stop me, and I realized that this is not the first time this has happened. I had been in the same spot so many times before in my addiction, but I was clean, and I was more miserable than I had ever been because I wasn't high to cover up those feelings. And I drove away just feeling worthless and in so much pain. And I'm on my way to the girl's house, and there's this one country road where if I took a right, it went to where she lived. And if I took a left, it went to where my sponsor lived. And I sat at that intersection, And I don't know how, but I turned left. And I went to my sponsors, and he was there. And I just said, I'm miserable, I'm crazy, please help me. And he sat with me. And he talked me through it. And, he told me what to do anytime that I'm crazy. Don't use number one. However many meetings you're going to, go to more. Bump it up some. And start whatever step you're not working on. So that's the day that I started my fourth step, and that's the day I really made a decision to work the rest of the steps. And he gave me some great instruction on the fourth step. He said, write on it every night. Don't skip a night, but don't write more than 10 minutes at a time. The fourth step is the nicest thing you will ever do for yourself. You don't want to dig up all these emotions and write for hours on end, just short spurts. You want to get it on paper. So I did that. I don't know how long it took me, a month or so. I know that I finished my fourth step at a convention in Indiana. The Indiana Convention, ISNAC, I believe, in Terre Haute, Indiana. Interesting place. I finished it there, and on the way back, I went straight to my sponsors and worked the fifth step with them. And I had always imagined that when you worked the fifth step, like a light would come down on you and you'd kind of float and all of this stuff. That's sort of what I heard from people who hadn't worked the fifth step. And that didn't happen. There was no light that I could see, but something did happen. I remember going out to his porch after we were done, and I had this strange, warm feeling inside of me. And what that feeling was trust. For the first time in my life, I completely trusted another human being, and I had never experienced that feeling before. A few months later, he picked me up, and we went to Canton and picked up this awesome guy named Jim B., and we came down to Ripley. And at the end, I had like two great old-timers that I respected in the front seat, and I was in the back seat, and I just drilled them about the steps the entire ride from Canton to Ripley. And I learned so much. I learned that I was on a fifth step vacation and that the sixth step had been working me, and I should work it if I want some relief. And, I learned about amends. I thought, in my head, amends was you went to everyone's door, like, in a row, and they said, no. Some amends, you need to go make direct amends. Other amends, there's a higher power, and the other person has to be willing to accept those amends. And you just be prepared, and your higher power will bring you two together at the time when you're ready and when they're ready. And I heard him say that, and I'm like, well, that sounds fishy. It sounds like you just don't like working that step. Just let a higher power take care of it. You don't have to go do this uncomfortable stuff. And man, when I got on the eighth step, when I got on the ninth step, I'd worked the eighth step. The day after I started the ninth step, I got a phone call from a girl who was on my list who I hadn't talked to in over 3 or 4 years. And there was a very specific amend. It was a specific material amend that I knew was an issue there. And she called me and said, hey, I hear you're doing well. I'd love to see you. I'm getting married in a couple of months. I'd actually like you to be at my wedding, which gave me an opportunity to give a wedding gift. And she came down the next day, and we hung out and we talked. And, that amend was made. And tangent, couple of ninth steps later, this same girl calls me up while I'm on the ninth step and says, hey, I'm in rehab. Guess what? I'm an alcoholic, it turns out. They tell me I'm supposed to call people, but I don't want to. What do you know about this sponsorship thing? And, I was able to help her, get comfortable in recovery and share with her some of my experience. And that amend has kept going. I find that with a lot of my amends, they keep going. And every time I get to another ninth step, that amend pops up, but it's from a different perspective. And it's really crazy. At one point, I was on a second or third ninth step, and my best friend hadn't gotten clean yet. He was still using. And his family became my second family for a long time. And then my addiction destroyed that. And we started to build that back up. And I went back to Toledo, and I hung out with his mom. And his mom, she worked at this salon, the only place I ever got my hair cut back when I had hair. And it was the end of the day, and she locked up the doors, and we just sat and smoked and talked, and she cried, and And she was just miserable, and she said, Jason, the worst thing about this is I can't talk to anybody about my son's addiction. I can't tell the people at work, oh my God, this happened. And she told me it was a relief to be able to talk about it. And I'm sitting there listening to her and, being there for her. And I realized, in some ways, this is making amends to my mother. I'm being there for someone, like no one was there for my mom when she was going through all of that. And, the spiritual principles are so great and intertwined that, it all comes together. You can't pick one spiritual principle out or one step out. It's an awesome program. I don't know where I was, but ninth step, okay. My first ninth step, I had worked the 8th step, and I became willing, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do for all of the 9th step. That girl called me. It was around Christmas time. I was able to buy Christmas presents for my family for like the first time ever. And I was going to school at that point. I was undergrad at a university. And I'm like, I know what I'll get my parents for Christmas. And I go to the bookstore and I get a sweatshirt that says BGSU Mom, right? And I get a golf shirt that says BGSU Dad. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is appropriate. I get them, put them in a box. I start walking to my car. And on my way to the car, I just start bawling. Tears just start uncontrollably streaming down my face. Not because I got them a present, right? But because I realized that for the first time, I was a son that they could be proud of, right? I was doing something in my life. My mom didn't have to sit in bed waiting for the phone call. Every night before I got clean, that's what she did. She sat in bed and just waited for the phone call that I was dead or in jail or in the hospital. She didn't have to do that anymore. I was a son that they could actually be proud of and, go out of their way to bring me up at family functions instead of going out of their way to avoid my name and conversation at family functions. 10, 11, and 12 are great. I'm not going to share specifics. 10, I've worked 10 a lot of different ways, and it's saved my ass a lot of times. Many times in my life, I'd find myself with my ass falling off and not sure how I got there. And I look back, and it's just a very steady progression of one little thing. Okay, and then there's another little thing, and then there's another little thing, and now I can skip that meeting this week. I go to plenty of meetings, I don't have to be completely honest about that thing. Just these tiny little things that don't seem like much until one day I wake up and I realize I'm in a hole, and I don't know how to get out. I found myself in one of those holes once, and I called my sponsor. I'm like, I'm screwed. What do? I feel horrible. I don't know how to feel better. And he said, well, let's start with the 10th step. Let's start fixing those little things every day, and eventually you'll get out of that hole. That time, the way I worked the 10th step that time was calling my sponsor. He lived somewhere else by that point. So I called him every day and let him know what was going on with me and just talk to him, let another human know what I'm doing and what's going on in my life. And eventually I got out of that hole, and I can barely remember what that hole was about now. The 10th step, the 11th step is awesome, as is 12. Let me talk a little bit about, so I went to school in recovery and didn't stop. I barely made it out of high school. I'm dyslexic, and I never liked to read and didn't read, and I never did homework and would do well on the tests and pass with C's, and that's how it worked. The last day of high school, when all the seniors were away on their free day or whatever, I was in my English teacher's room doing extra credit for home ec so I could graduate, right? So I did graduate high school, but just barely. And I remember in high school, these other people would talk about this thing called college, which sounded like a different planet, literally. It sounded like another planet that some people went to, and it wasn't a planet I could ever get to. And, that was it. So when my sponsor told me, what are your dreams? What are your aspirations? I learned how to dream in Narcotics Anonymous. I didn't know how to do that before. And then I learned that my dreams always shortchange myself, So don't tie yourself to your dreams because you'll be selling yourself short. I said, oh, I've heard about this planet called college. I think that might be cool because I think I might be smart. I'm not sure. I do really dumb things, but my brain seems to work when things are going all right. And he set me up with this job that let me go to school. And I remember I went to register for classes. And I have a sister who's 7 years younger than me. One of her friends from high school was the person at the desk there. And I'm like, hey, I want to register. And she's like, okay, you need to take this training. We used to do it on videotape, but you just go online now and fill out these things. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And she's like, oh, it's just this form. You fill it out, just go to the computer, go online, go to this website. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And she's like, okay, the computer's right over there. She didn't understand that I was saying I didn't know how to turn on a computer. I didn't know what the internet was. I didn't know how to use a mouse or a keyboard. And that was some great humility with my little sister's friend. She had to wheel out this old ancient VCR and brush the dust off it and put this video in for me so I could do it the old school way. But I soon realized that going to school gave me the opportunity to face all of my greatest fears on a daily basis. That's fun. Being judged by other people, having to speak, and all of these things I had to go and do every single day. I was older than the other people. I felt different than them, all of this stuff. And so many times I wanted to run away, but I didn't because I kept going to meetings. And, something terrible would happen. I have to drop out. Everyone thinks I'm an idiot. And I'd go to a meeting and share and realize, get over yourself. You're not that important. Other people aren't thinking about you that much. And, meetings I wouldn't have made it through school without meetings, without the program and steps and my sponsor. So that was my dream. And the first day I was on campus, and still to this day when I'm on a campus, I can feel like I'm walking around on a different planet. I just walk, I'm like, oh, they have trees here. Look at this crowd. Oh my God. It's really awesome. And I love that I can still feel that way. But that was my dream, right? A few years later, I found out that there's this thing called graduate school where they actually pay you to go to school, which still makes no freaking sense whatsoever. So, if I would have limited myself to my dream, I would have been screwed. I went to this graduate school thing and made it through there. Eventually, people call me doctor now, and that's pretty cool. I like making people call me doctor, actually. And So at the moment, and what I do professionally doesn't really matter, but this is kind of cool, and this is because of you. This is our experience, not my experience. I work for one of the best universities in the world right now. I have a contract that says in the first line, primary responsibilities to generate ideas, which I need to frame that and put it on my wall. This useless junkie who couldn't do anything is getting paid by this amazing institution to think. I get paid to think. It's nuts. And in August, we are moving down to Louisiana to a place down there, which is, I don't think this is going to be my last Ripley, but I don't know if I'll be here next year. But we're moving down for what people who do what I do would consider a dream job, the most dreamiest, unobtainable, whatever. And to me, my dreams have been surpassed so many times. To me, it's part of the journey. It's another awesome part of the journey that I can enjoy. And so that's part of that. Oh, there's so much stuff. I made notes this morning, and I can't read any of them. But let me tell you a little bit about what's going on with me now, and then I'll try to wrap up. What time? Okay, yeah. So I have to say, for anyone that's new or whatever, the thing that has helped me the most, and there are a lot of things that have helped me the most, and allowed me the opportunity to have this amazing life I have. I never stopped going to meetings. Twice in my recovery, I think because of circumstances, I went 2 weeks without a meeting, and I didn't like that. But I never stopped. I decided early on, for some reason, a bit of providence, I think, I decided, okay, I'm going to have to do this for the long haul. going to have to do this the rest of my life. I don't want my recovery to be based on fear. I don't want to get clean because I'm afraid of using. I want it to be based on something positive. I want to recover because of the positive things recovery has to offer. So I started looking for that. I went to meetings and I looked for people with spirituality, and I started focusing on the growth that was happening within me and the positives of this fellowship. And meetings have almost never been a chore. Sometimes I'll go through things where I'm like, okay, I just know I have to go. But most of the time, I don't have to go to meetings. I get to go to meetings. It's exciting, right? I don't have to be of service. I get to be of service. Although I do have to be of service. And if you're not, you probably should. All of the things in my life today are like that on good days. I don't have to do anything. I get to do all of these amazing things. So about a year ago, I got a message informing me that I was going to be a father. And it was not something I was expecting or planning on or at the moment really thrilled about. In fact, I totally freaked out. This was the end of the world. I called my sponsor, and after he finished laughing, he said, man, I don't know, just go to meetings, don't use, get in touch with me. I've never been through this, find people who've been through it, because someone in Narcotics Anonymous, whatever you're going through, someone here has been through it and gotten through it clean. You don't have to do anything alone. So a friend of mine had come into town that day, and we were visiting and stuff, and I didn't completely break down, but I was freaked. And I went to a meeting that night, and someone brought up a topic, and I don't remember the topic, but it made me think of my cat, Sammy Davis III, the greatest cat that ever lived. When I had a year or two clean, someone found this little kitten behind a dumpster with one eye like this big that wound up getting taken out, and he couldn't support his own weight. And I said, I'll take him. And, for the first 2 months of his life, I took care of him. For the next 11 years, he took care of me. And the great thing about cats is that they're almost fully self-supporting, right? They take care of themselves. That's what's awesome about a cat. If I go to a convention for the weekend, I don't have to worry about Sammy. I don't have to find someone to walk him, He's cool. He takes care of himself, and that's what was great about a cat. The last couple of years of his life, and that's what I loved about having a cat. In the last couple of years of his life, he developed some serious health problems. And my schedule changed, and I had to be there 2 and 3 times a day to feed him this special stuff and to do these things. And, every reason that in my head was great about having a cat was out of the window. It was this huge responsibility that I had to be present for. And what I found going through that was that I loved it. I loved being there for him in his last couple of years. I loved having that responsibility and being able to do that. And I found out all this stuff about myself that I didn't know. I discovered all these spiritual principles that I hadn't had the opportunity to practice yet. And when I practiced them, they made my life better. And I'm sharing about this at a meeting when I really just want to go off and say how horrible everything is because I'm going to be a dad. And I'm sharing my experience. I'm like, God damn it. This always happens. Every time I think something's terrible, I share my experience in recovery and realize, no, it's not terrible. It's going to be this amazing opportunity, and it has been an amazing opportunity. It's absolutely awesome. A few months later, I realized that there was this strange coinciding thing where the same month that I was going to be a dad, I was also going to be 40, and I was also getting like a real job for the first time in ever. And I freaked out again. It was like life was conspiring against me to be a grown-up. And I never wanted to be a grown-up. That was not in my plans. And I freaked out. And this time I called my sponsee because he had a lot of kids and he has this cool job. And I'm like, I call him up and he's here. I'm like, God damn it, Bill. Life wants me to be a grown-up. I don't want to be. And he's like, well, what's being a grown-up? It just means that you've got responsibilities. And hell, look at your life. You're one of the most responsible people I know. You're responsible for this and this and that. And I talked to him like, oh, okay, it's not a big deal. I can be a grown-up. I guess I'm already sort of a grown-up, whether I want to admit it or not. And Yeah, so it's really awesome being here. The first time I ever spoke, I'll go ahead and close. Yeah, why not? First time I ever spoke, I asked my sponsor, I'm like, someone asked me to speak, what do I do? And he said, well, here's what you do. Know what your message is, and then share your message. I'm like, okay, I guess. So I had to think about what my message was. And when I thought about it, this is what I thought about. I thought about a courtroom in Eastgate, Michigan, outside of Detroit. I had gotten arrested, I had gotten pulled over, and I had rigs in my car, right? So I got charged with a misdemeanor city health code ordinance violation. Sounds kind of cute when you say it like that, right? I did not think that this was a big deal, and in fact, it wasn't a big deal. Normally, I had a really fancy lawyer from some other stuff in another state, and he decided, he said, okay, I'll go to court with you. That's fine. And we're, expecting, is it going to be a $20 fine or a $50 fine, right? And me and my lawyer are up there, and my mom drove me, and she's sitting right behind me in the court. And so me, my mom, and my lawyer. The judge comes up, he looks at the case, he's like, okay, 90 days in jail, and bangs the gavel. And I'm shocked, and my lawyer goes, Judge, no. See, he's going to meetings, he's getting slips signed, he's in this intensive outpatient, he's this, he's that. And the judge looked at my lawyer and he said, Mr. Marsh, heroin addicts do not recover. And he left. And the saddest, so he said that with my mom right behind me. The saddest and most painful part of that day was that I believed him. I had no evidence in my life that I could ever stop using. It was not something that was conceivable for me. And so when I think about my message comes from the basic text, and it's, the time has come when that tired old lie, once an addict, always an addict, will no longer be accepted by society or the addict himself. We do recover. Thanks so much for having me. Drive safe.